Hi everyone, this is Laura Hammock from the Marble Jar channel, and this is the 5th video of this series on parenting internet kids, or how to raise kids in a digital world. This series talks about the good, the bad, and the ugly of technology and what we can do about it as parents. Today we'll be talking about some of the behavioral techniques or rules and limits to put in place with your kids. So what is clear if you've just watched the first 4 parts of this series is that the world is changing fast and we can hardly keep up. There are new ways to access the internet, new internet requirements from schools, new apps coming out all the time. It is overwhelming and never ending, and it just makes you want to throw up your hands. It's a wild west with no laws, and as parents of this generation, we are the pioneers, unfortunately, forging new paths and making the rules up as we go. So here are some of the questions that we're going to cover today. When should my kid have a smartphone? What apps are okay? How much access is okay? What time of the day should they have access? How do I limit access? If we agree to limit, how do I monitor that? The bottom line is these decisions are going to vary by child. Everyone watching has a unique circumstance in terms of your kid's age, gender, addiction level, and interest. That says we can certainly talk through some of the things you'll need to consider in order to make these decisions on your own. Let's get started. Question number 1, when should my kid get a smartphone? The age here seems to be getting younger and younger. Right now, apparently the average age is 10, but in 2012, the average age was 12. The rule of thumb seems to be that kids are getting phones as they go into middle or junior high school as they gain more independence. In my area, middle school starts at 7th grade, so around 11 or 12 years old. Obviously, there are circumstances that change that equation. Kids of divorced parents tend to get phones much earlier to facilitate communication directly with both parents. Parents might want to give phones early to kids who commute from school by train or who have extracurricular activities far from home. So in my house, we used a track phone when my kids were in 6th grade and started to gain a little bit of independence. I wasn't ready for them to have the responsibility of maintaining their own phone, but I still wanted to be able to get in touch with them. Generally speaking, it's better to put it off if you can, but you will have to gauge the social effect on your child. And what I mean by that is, as much as we would like our kids to socialize face to face and to call each other, the world that they live in is different. So make sure you're not shutting down their social lives, particularly if your kid has issues in that area. So there's a debate about whether there is much difference between a phone and, say, an iTouch or an iPad or a Kindle Fire or other kinds of tablets or handheld devices. The statement goes, my kid already has an iPad. What's the difference if he gets a phone? So this is just my opinion, but I would say there's a huge difference. And it doesn't really have to do as much with what they can do online. That's more or less the same. The difference to me is access and possessiveness. As soon as they have a phone, they will carry that thing around like it's their most prized possession, which it actually is. And in order to regain control of it, you will have to pry it out of their hands. In my experience, it is much harder to limit access once they have a phone. I'd be curious about the experience of other parents here. So at whatever age you decide to give your kid a phone, just make sure you put restrictions and rules in place from the beginning. It's harder to do later on. So we'll talk about those next. Next, we'll talk about phone contract. Once you decide to get a phone for your kids, it has to come with rules. I happen to be a big fan of black and white, documented and pre-agreed upon rules. You can go the loosey-goosey route, but I like it when all parties understand and agree about what they're getting into. A good way to do this is to have a contract with your kid. They can't take possession of the phone until they've talked through the rules and signed the contract. What kinds of things should that contract cover? Here are some examples. Usage restrictions by time of day. For example, you're only allowed to use your phone between the hours of 7 to 8 a.m. and 4 to 8 p.m. Or you can only use the phone for 2 hours total every day, anything like that. What about usage restriction based on chores? You can use your phone once you've entirely gotten ready for school, and then define what that means. And once your homework and chores are done after school. It should contain social media specific restrictions, like only put things on private setting. All of your followers are subject to approval. You have to friend your own parents. You have to make the passwords accessible to your parents. You can make limits about who follows your child, like, only people you've actually met, not friends of friends or complete strangers. And then sharing logins. From the beginning, nothing should be considered private on your child's phone, particularly when they are young. They have to share their phone's passcode with you. That's the passcode to get into the phone. And they should share all of their login information for apps and sites. So any social media that they have, username and password for each parent. And the parents should get a notification if those things change. The contract can contain a whole range of other restrictions. Things like there's no phones during dinner, or there are no phones on our Saturday walks to get coffee, or there are no phones in the car. Those are just some examples. Your contract can contain app restrictions, no social media, no first-person shooter games, no in-app purchases unless pre-approved. Apps need to be cleared by parents before you can download them. Include that phone privileges can be revoked at any time if the contract is broken, or obviously if other things go wrong at home. And maybe that the phone needs to be docked at night in the kitchen, in parents' bedroom, etc. It's too much of a distraction for them to have in their rooms. You should agree with your child on a punishment. Taking the phone away seems like a good natural punishment, but I would suggest not making the punishments too harsh. Make sure to have both parents and your child agree to and sign the contract, and then review it regularly, once or twice a year or as needed. Be open when your kid suggests changes that are reasonable. Okay, what about the question of what apps that you should allow? You can't obviously say no to everything, but you can be very selective and very involved in which apps your kids are able to use. I would suggest no anonymous messaging apps ever. Some examples are Kik or Ask.fm. But your choices are going to depend on your kid and what his or her weaknesses might be. So for example, if your kid has some violent tendencies, I would shy away from first-person shooter games and other forms of violent, gory apps. If your kid has some attention-seeking issues, you may want to limit social media that could lead to risky behavior, Snapchat or video messaging. And if you are interested in limiting your kids' materialistic and superficial tendencies, maybe say no to social media that promote those values, Instagram, shopping sites, etc. And if your kid gets really upset when people are hanging out without them and has some social issues, limit access to social media in general, Instagram, Facebook, Musical.ly. Also, there's a lot of websites that rate apps and sites online for kids by age appropriateness. My favorite for both apps and for movies and TV is commonsensemedia.org, but there are plenty of others that can help you make these decisions. Lastly, I'll say that even if you are carefully making these decisions, apps are constantly updating their offerings, so that Snapchat now has a bunch of Instagram-like components, and Facebook just added a group video chat feature like Google Hangouts. It's really difficult to stay on top of these things. So talk to your kids and get them to show you how they're using their favorite apps. All these rules can feel really overwhelming to parents and to kids. It's all well and good to have those rules in place, but if you don't enforce them, then you can have anarchy on your hands in a matter of minutes. Each of these rules requires some level of checking in occasionally or constantly for some kids. Parents always start out with great intentions, myself included, But eventually life gets in the way and you realize that the kids are sleeping with their phones, they're on their phones all day without having their chores done, they're downloading apps that you don't even know about, they're following a bunch of strangers on social media and buying a ton of in-app purchases that are showing up on your credit card bill. Fortunately, you can also use technology to help. In the last or the sixth part of this series, we'll talk about using technology to help enforce your rules, whatever they are. Thanks for watching.